Have you ever been haunted, not by a ghost in a dark hallway, but by something far more persistent, a memory, a single moment from your past, but has followed you for decades like a shadow you can never quite escape? Hello, I'm John from Texas, United States, your friend and narrator of real stories. Stay with me until the end of this incredible story. Want to see your story told here? Then get in touch with us. Is there a conversation you wish you could have again? A moment you would give anything to go back and change? For Katherine, at 74 years old, that ghost was a memory nearly 50 years old. It was a specter that lived in the polite, respectful distance she shared with her only son, Thomas. A distance that looked like love to anyone observing from the outside, but felt like an ocean of unspoken words. To the outside world, their relationship was exemplary. Thomas was a good man, a dutiful son. He called her every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock sharp. He visited faithfully on holidays, always arriving with flowers. He never raised his voice, never forgot her birthday. Their love story, the one between a mother and her child, looked like a placid, peaceful lake. But Katherine knew what lay beneath that calm surface, a deep, cold chasm of unspoken words and a single, unforgivable mistake that had shaped their relationship for half a century. Her mistake. The news that should have been a source of pure joy felt instead like a final summons, a last call to make things right. Thomas had called her the week before, his voice filled with a rare, genuine excitement. "Are you sitting down, Mom?" he had asked. "You're going to be a great-grandmother." A great-grandmother, a new life, a new branch on their family tree. The news was a blessing from God, and she was truly happy for her son and his wife. But as soon as she hung up the phone, a familiar, cold dread washed over her. How could she hold that new baby with hands that had failed to comfort her own child when he needed her most? How could she look into those innocent eyes while the ghost of her past still stood between her and her son? The memory was always there, lurking in the shadows, the source of her chronic insomnia, the fuel for her nightly wrestling matches with God. Thomas had been 8 years old, a sensitive, quiet boy. Her husband was traveling for work, and she was overwhelmed, having just received deeply troubling news about her own mother's declining health. She was a tangled mess of anxiety and grief. That afternoon, Thomas had come home from school, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He told her about a bully on the playground, a bigger boy named Marcus, who had cornered and threatened him. He needed his mother. He needed her comfort, her reassurance, her strength. And Katherine, lost in her own selfish storm of worry, had failed him in the most fundamental way. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Thomas," she had snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. "Stop being so dramatic. You need to learn to stand up for yourself. I have enough real problems to worry about without you inventing new ones." The look on his small face, the instant crushing of his spirit, the way his eyes shuddered as he retreated into himself, had been etched into her memory with the permanent clarity of our greatest regrets. She had apologized later, of course, a quick, distracted apology, but the damage was done. In that moment, her son had learned that his fears were not safe with her, that his vulnerability was an inconvenience. From that day forward, a subtle but impenetrable protective wall had gone up between them. Their relationship became one of impeccable politeness, surface-level warmth, and carefully modulated affection. They talked about safe subjects, the weather, his job, her garden, but they never talked about the things that truly mattered. Have you ever felt that way, trapped by a mistake from your past, like an insect preserved in amber? Unable to forgive yourself, even when you know in your heart that God has forgiven you. Katherine lived in that trap every single day. She read her Bible, asking Jesus for forgiveness, Yet she could not bring herself to take the one step that might actually set her free, confessing her failure to her son and asking for his forgiveness. The fear that paralyzed her was overwhelming. What if he didn't even remember? What if bringing it up would dredge up a pain he had managed to bury? Or worse, what if he did remember, and her apology would confirm his lifelong suspicion that her love was conditional? The risk of shattering the fragile peace they had managed to build felt too great to bear. So she kept her secret like a stone in her chest, and the ghost of that memory continued to haunt the hallways of her heart. But the news of the baby had changed everything. This wasn't just about her and Thomas anymore. This was about the legacy she would leave for this new generation. She could not, would not, allow this new child to be born into a family where love was polite but not profound, where connection was a duty but not a joy. She knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating that she had to try to make things right. After another long, sleepless night spent wrestling with her conscience, she looked at her Bible, then at the telephone on the wall. She understood that her faith required not just prayer, but action. It required courage. She could not meet her great-grandchild with this lie of omission, still poisoning the air between her and her son. With a trembling hand and a heart pounding in her chest, she picked up the phone. When Thomas answered, she didn't waste time on their usual pleasantries. Her voice was shaking, but it was filled with a new and unfamiliar resolve. "Thomas," she said, taking a leap of faith across 45 years of silence, "I need you to come over this weekend. There's something I should have told you when you were 8 years old. And I need to tell you now." The days leading up to that Saturday were a special kind of torment for Katherine. Every tick of the grandfather clock in her living room sounded like a judgment. Every hour that passed, another step closer to a reckoning she had both desperately wanted and feared for 45 years. She cleaned her house with a frantic energy, scrubbing floors that were already immaculate and polishing furniture that already gleamed. It was a physical manifestation of her desperate need to make things right, to create a perfect space for an imperfect and terrifying conversation. Does anyone else relate to this kind of anxious preparation before a difficult conversation? Let us know in the comments how you've dealt with similar moments. She barely slept, her insomnia armed with a fresh arsenal of what-if scenarios that played on repeat in her mind. She practiced different versions of the conversation, trying out opening lines and explanations, but all of them felt hollow. Her prayers were constant, not asking for a specific outcome, but simply for the courage to speak her truth with love and the grace to accept her son's reaction. When the doorbell finally rang at 2 o'clock, her heart leaped into her throat. She opened the door to see Thomas, his face attentive but cautious. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping inside with his usual polite, careful hug. "You said you wanted to talk." The air in her living room felt thick with unspoken history. She had set out her best china tea service and a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies, a mother's timeless offering of comfort. They both sat in their usual spots, an awkward silence stretching between them. Katherine wrung her hands. Her rehearsed words evaporated. "Thomas," she began, her voice trembling, "the story I need to tell you, it's about me, about a mistake I made a very long time ago. I need you to know that it has been the great sorrow of my life, and that not a single day has gone by that I haven't regretted it." She saw a flicker of concern cross his features. He likely thought she was about to confess some major family secret. "Do you remember," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "when you were 8 years old, and there was a boy at school, a bully named Marcus, who had been frightening you. Thomas's brow furrowed in concentration. I think so, he said slowly. A bigger kid. He was in 5th grade when I was in 3rd. Yes, Katherine whispered, the memory rushing back. And you came home so scared. You tried to tell me about it. You needed me. And I was having a very bad day, and I was cruel to you. The words felt like glass in her throat. I told you to stop being so dramatic. I told you that you needed to learn to stand up for yourself. I said I had real problems to worry about. She looked at her son, her eyes pleading for some sign that he understood the magnitude of her confession. But Thomas's face remained thoughtful, not hurt. Mom, he said gently, after a long pause, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really remember that specific conversation. I remember the bully, but I don't remember what you said to me about it. The words landed in the quiet room like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock through Katherine. 45 years of guilt, of a self-imposed exile from her son's emotional life, all built on a memory that existed primarily in her own tortured conscience. But before she could fully process this revelation, Thomas continued. But Mom, he said, leaning forward, his expression shifting to a deep, searching earnestness, I do remember the feeling, not from that one day, but from many days. Have you ever experienced a conversation that completely changed your relationship with a family member? Share your story in the comments below. We would love to hear it. Katherine was about to learn that her one great, remembered sin was not the cause of the distance between them. It was merely a symptom. What feeling, honey? She asked, her heart pounding for a new and different reason. The feeling, he said, struggling for words, that I couldn't bring my problems to you, that I couldn't be weak around you. It wasn't because you were cruel, Mom. It was because you were so incredibly strong. You were perfect. You handled everything with such grace. You were like this pillar that held up our entire family. I always felt like my small problems, my childish fears, would just be adding unnecessary weight to someone who was already carrying so much. I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want to disappoint you by not being as strong as you were. The revelation was stunning. The wall between them hadn't been built by her one moment of anger. It had been constructed by her lifetime of trying to be the perfect mother. Her son hadn't felt rejected. He had felt inadequate. The distance she had interpreted as his resentment was actually his misguided attempt to protect her. Oh, Thomas, she breathed, a new wave of understanding washing over her. Perfect, strong. Oh, my dear boy, if you only knew. I was terrified most of the time. I was just pretending. I understand that now, he said with a sad smile. But a little boy doesn't see that. He just sees a mother who never seems to cry, who never seems to falter, and he thinks, I can't show her my own tears. In that moment, 45 years of polite distance dissolved, for the first time. They were not just a dutiful son and his respected mother. They were two flawed, vulnerable human beings, finally telling the truth. I am so sorry, Mom, that I never let you see my struggles, he said. And I am so sorry, she replied, tears now streaming down her face, that I never let you see mine. He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm and warm. It was the hug he couldn't give her when he was 8 years old. So, you forgive me? She asked, her voice a whisper. For that day, Mom, he said, his own eyes now glistening, there is nothing to forgive, but thank you. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for finally letting me see you. He paused, then asked a question that signaled the beginning of their new story, a question that invited her into his world in a way she had never been before. So, he said, his voice full of a gentle curiosity she had never heard from him. "Tell me about that day. Tell me what you were so worried about with Grandma. I'd like to know." And so, for the first time, Katherine told her son the story of her own fears. She sat there in the quiet living room and unburdened her heart, sharing the anxieties she had carried as a young wife and daughter. She spoke of her own mother's illness, the fear of losing her, the heavy responsibility she felt. She confessed that on that long-ago day, she hadn't been a strong matriarch. She had been a scared daughter, just as he had been a scared son. They talked for hours, truly talked, for the first time in their lives. 45 years of polite distance melted away in a single afternoon of shared vulnerability. Katherine learned about the pressures her son faced at work, the worries he had for his own children. And Thomas learned about the woman behind the mother, a woman with her own doubts, her own struggles, her own imperfect heart. He saw that her strength was not a judgment on his weakness, but a shield she had worn to protect her own fragile soul. The wall between them did not just crumble, it was lovingly dismantled, brick by the power of their shared truth. The weeks that followed were a time of rebirth for Katherine. The weekly phone calls, once a source of quiet dread, became the highlight of her week. They no longer talked about the weather, they talked about their lives. Thomas would call her for advice, not as a formality, but because he genuinely valued her wisdom, the wisdom of a woman who had weathered life's storms. And Katherine, free from the burden of her secret guilt, found her voice again, not just as a mother, but as a friend. Her insomnia, the nightly companion of her long penance, began to fade. The ghost that had haunted her was gone, banished by the light of forgiveness, not just her son's forgiveness, but her own. Have you ever noticed a connection between your emotional or spiritual health and your physical health, like trouble sleeping during a time of great stress or guilt? Share in the comments if you've ever experienced this kind of mind-body connection. Katherine finally allowed herself to accept the grace that she had so often prayed for, but never felt worthy of. She understood now that God hadn't been waiting for her to be perfect. He had been waiting for her to be honest. Her love story with her son was being rewritten, its final chapters not a continuation of the polite distance of the past, but a beautiful new narrative of profound connection. 2 months later, the call she had been waiting for came. Her great-granddaughter had been born. As she traveled to the hospital with Thomas, he had insisted on picking her up. A quiet joy filled her heart. There was no dread, no fear of not being worthy. There was only gratitude. She walked into the hospital room to see her granddaughter-in-law, Sarah, looking tired but radiant as she held a tiny, perfect bundle. Thomas stood beside the bed, his face glowing with a father's love. He caught Katherine's eye and smiled, a real, open smile that reached deep into her soul. It was a smile that said, "We are whole. Our family is whole." Later, as Katherine sat in a rocking chair holding her new great-granddaughter, Thomas came and stood behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "She's beautiful, Mom," he said softly. Katherine looked down at the tiny, sleeping face, then up at her son. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She is." In that moment, looking at the 3 generations of her family, she felt a peace so complete it was a physical presence. The past had been healed, the present was a blessing, and the future, embodied in the tiny baby in her arms, was full of a limitless, hopeful love. She understood that the greatest legacy she could pass down was not an image of strength or perfection, but the powerful truth she had learned so late in life, that love is not about never making mistakes, but about having the courage to ask for forgiveness and the grace to give it. This new baby would grow up in a family where love was honest and real. Isn't it amazing how one conversation can change the entire future of a family? How do you think this healing between Katherine and Thomas will impact this new little girl's life? Comment your thoughts below. The story of Katherine is a profound reminder that the ghosts of our past only have as much power as we choose to give them. It teaches us that it is never too late to heal a broken relationship, to speak the truth, and to rewrite the story of our family with the ink of forgiveness and grace. It shows that the most courageous act of love is often the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit our own imperfections, and in doing so, to give others permission to do the same. If this story has reminded you of someone in your own life you need to reach out to, tell us about that feeling in the comments. Sometimes just sharing that intention can give us the courage to act. Most importantly, Katherine's journey teaches us that the most courageous act of love is often the willingness to let others see our imperfections. When we stop trying to be the perfect parent, spouse, or friend, and start trying to be the real one, we create space for authentic connection and unconditional love to flourish. If this story of a mother and son finding their way back to each other across 4 decades of careful distance has touched your heart, please honor it with a like so that it may inspire others who are carrying their own ghosts of regret. And please subscribe to Stories Beyond 50 for more stories about the redemptive power of love and the truth that it's never too late to make things right. And now, we open this sacred space to you, our community of people who understand that life is complicated, and love is messy, and forgiveness is both the hardest and most necessary gift we can give. Is there an unspoken regret in your own life? A conversation you've been longing to have with a loved one, but haven't found the courage to initiate? What has your own journey taught you about the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability in our relationships? How can we build bridges of honest communication across the chasms that fear and misunderstanding create? Your wisdom, born from your own experiences, is a gift to everyone who reads these words. Please share it with us in the comments below, and if you're not ready to share your own story, but you believe deeply in the power of forgiveness to heal families and bridge generations, just write the single word forgiveness in the comments. Let us create together a space of healing and hope. We read and cherish every word you share. Thank you for your courage and your open heart. God bless you, and we will see you in the next story.